When former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton attempted to publicly humiliate American actor and humanitarian Jonathan Roumie during a tense session of the Global Human Dignity Forum, she never expected that his quiet, devastating response would leave the entire assembly frozen in silence with a single sentence. Roumie didn't just shift the tone of the debate, he shattered it. Clinton was left speechless, and the moment, captured by dozens of cameras, began to reverberate around the world, especially among the communities Roumie had long stood for: the unseen, the unheard, the forgotten. The chamber was unusually still. Reporters sat poised. Translators paused mid-sentence. Jonathan Roumie had just taken his seat to open a crucial discussion on accountability in the disbursement of humanitarian aid to refugee families. Before he could even touch the microphone, Hillary Clinton stood up abruptly. With a hard stare, she slammed a thick binder onto the conference table. Her voice was sharp. "Mr. Roumie," she said coldly, "the international community deserves to know why you have remained silent regarding the misallocation of aid funds in the regions you've been so publicly involved with. Or has your attachment to your personal brand kept you from telling the truth?" Gasps and murmurs echoed through the room like a ripple of thunder. But Roumie didn't flinch, not even a twitch of discomfort. Inside, however, something old stirred. Memories of growing up in a working-class home, of watching his mother cry silently at the kitchen sink, of hearing neighbors say they were invisible to the world. He looked around slowly, then directly at Clinton. He recognized the setup. She wanted a public takedown, but she didn't realize this time the fire wasn't hers alone. Clinton kept pushing. "You went quiet when shelters ran out of clean water, when displaced children in Texas and New Mexico died of preventable infections. You smiled on talk shows while people were suffering. Your silence was your betrayal." A few scattered claps from her allies. The journalists were typing frantically. Social media was already catching fire. Roumie leaned forward, hands gently clasped in front of him. His face showed nothing, but in his chest his heart pounded. Not from fear, from memory. He saw again the mother clutching her daughter in a shelter with mold-stained walls. He remembered holding her hand, promising her voice would be heard. And now, someone who had never even set foot there was accusing him of abandoning those people. Pain, injustice, lies, rage. And yet Roumie waited. She wanted an outburst, but he only needed a sentence. "Answer the question, Mr. Roumie," Clinton barked. "Why did you stay silent while people suffered?" He stood up slowly. His voice didn't rise. It was soft, measured, but it fell like thunder cloaked in grace. He looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Where were you, Madam Secretary, when migrant mothers buried their children, while you were sipping champagne in Davos?" The silence was immediate. A few officials dropped their pens. A journalist audibly exhaled. Clinton's face turned a shade lighter. She opened her mouth to reply, "Moi," but no sound came out. Her hands trembled slightly. Everyone in that room knew. She hadn't been there. Not once, and Roumie had just carved the truth into the walls of that forum with a single sentence. And it was only the beginning. He didn't boast. He sat down gently, his eyes lowered. You could almost see it, the weight of the mothers, the children, the unseen millions, resting on his shoulders. For the first time, the forum wasn't just watching him. They were listening. While Clinton sat frozen in place, the whispers began. Did he really just say that? She didn't deny it. This changes everything. Main Delegate Ramirez leaned toward her and whispered, "Hillary, you need to stop, now." But she didn't move. Her pride bled quietly, but her ego couldn't retreat. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Mr. Roumie, that was dramatic," she said, "but it doesn't change the facts." Roumie replied without raising his voice. "Madam Secretary, your name appears on an official travel request to Davos just 3 days after the New Mexico shelter collapse. That same evening, you delivered a keynote at a tech gala. I've read the transcript, not a single mention of the victims." One of Clinton's aides covered his face with his hand. Another tried to discreetly slide her folder under the table. Delegates began swiping through their tablets. Headlines were already forming from Roumie's words. Outside in communities across the U.S. and beyond, people began to ask questions. But something deeper was happening. People weren't looking at Roumie as a celebrity anymore. They weren't calling him idealistic or naive. They were looking at him with respect, because in that moment, he wasn't defending his reputation. He was defending the invisible. Every shelter, every family left behind, every prayer that had gone unanswered. Roumie looked up again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't need a platform. I don't need applause. I just need the truth to be spoken out loud, because the dead can't speak for themselves." In the back row, someone wept silently. Even representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Clinton looked as if she were trapped in a storm she thought she could control. But the wind had shifted, and now the storm belonged to Jonathan Roumie. Inside the folder were documents that not only confirmed Hillary Clinton's absence during the crisis, but also revealed something far more damning. Emergency funds originally allocated for the construction of clean water systems in refugee camps had been diverted, redirected into an environmental initiative managed by a private foundation. A foundation chaired by the very same donor who had hosted the gala in Davos. Roumie didn't pick up the file, not yet. He simply closed it, slowly and deliberately, letting the silence in the room deepen like a wound. Then Hillary's voice broke through, trembling, brittle. "Are you suggesting that I misappropriated funds, Mr. Roumie?" Jonathan Roumie turned to her. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a sorrow that cut deeper. "I'm not suggesting anything, Madam Secretary," he said quietly. "I'm just wondering how $2.3 million disappeared from a clean water infrastructure program and ended up in a foundation where your brother sits on the board." The room exploded. Journalists stood up. Some delegates gasped audibly. A few simply slumped back in their chairs, stunned. Clinton froze. A visible shiver passed through her shoulders. "I had no direct participation," she stammered. Roumie's reply was almost kind. "Then I'm sure you'll welcome a full audit for the families in the camps who still drink bottled water while lobbyists toast with champagne. No shouting, no anger, just truth, cloaked in dignity." And that hurt more than any insult ever could. Far from Davos, in a modest church in rural Texas, a group of migrant mothers watched the hearing on a battered old TV. One of them, Doña Jenny, had lost her 7-year-old son Maximiliano due to toxic exposure in a temporary shelter. She had pleaded for help. No one came. But now, as she saw Roumie speak, not as an actor, not as a celebrity, but as her voice, her tears began to fall silently. Another mother whispered, barely audible, "Someone is finally fighting for us." One by one, the women present stood up. Some covered their mouths. Others wept. They didn't know Jonathan Roumie personally, but in that moment they felt heard, as if Maximiliano and all the forgotten were finally present in the room. Back in Washington, Roumie's phone vibrated quietly on the table. A message from Pastor Samuel deep in the American Midwest. "You made Los Angeles cry today, son. Keep going." Roumie lowered his gaze, closed his eyes, took a breath. This was no longer about optics or even reputation. This was about justice. The video of his statement spread like wildfire, from soup kitchens in Chicago to radios in Guatemala to smartphones in Bolivia. The phrase echoed across borders. "Where were you, Madam Secretary, when mothers buried their children while you were sipping champagne in Davos?" Commentators debated. Journalists quoted it. TikTok users set it to slow, reverent piano music. Even television anchors who once mocked Roumie fell silent and simply played the entire clip without commentary. But the most powerful reaction wasn't online. It was in real people. Steelworkers, single mothers, Vietnam veterans in wheelchairs, farmers with blistered hands. They all watched a man in a tailored suit speak for them, not at them, but with them. A truck driver from Georgia posted, "I cried watching Roumie today. I never thought someone in that building would speak for people like us." Roumie didn't see the applause. He was alone in his office, lights dimmed, calm, breathing slowly. A security agent entered. "Mr. Roumie, the Secretary General is calling." Roumie nodded. The call was short. A strong voice on the other end said, "Jonathan, you just did more with one sentence than others have done in 20 years. He didn't respond with pride. "It wasn't planned, sir. I just said what I saw, what I know." Silence, then. "That's why we trust you. But stay clean. They'll come for you. You just kicked a hornet's nest." Click. Roumie held the phone for a moment, then looked again at the folder. Names, documents, transfers, silent accomplices. It was no longer about defending himself. It was about cleansing the house. Suddenly, a motion was introduced on the forum floor. Immediate review of the conduct of Mr. Jonathan Roumie. Clinton wasn't done. Despite her humiliation, her allies, deeply entrenched, were furious. Representative Bronson, an old guard politician, stood. "This body cannot allow political theatrics. We deserve respect, not accusations based on rumors." Roumie did not answer with words. He calmly placed the folder on the secretary's desk and slid it forward. "These," he said clearly, "are not rumors. This is evidence." More gasps. The secretary hesitated. "Mr. Roumie, Are you asking for this to be officially entered into record? Jonathan looked toward Clinton, who now seemed unable to breathe. He stood. For the mother who buried her son, he said. For the worker who breathes poison in forgotten towns. For every single person who believed in this forum and was abandoned. The camera zoomed in. Journalists ran out to break the story. This was no longer politics. This was reckoning. Then something unexpected happened. As the secretary opened the file, a sealed envelope slipped out, marked in red, confidential source protection required. The room leaned forward. The secretary looked at Roumie. He gave a small nod. Proceed. Inside was a sworn statement by a former legislative aide. Dates, internal memos, private meetings between Clinton and elite lobbyists. And most damning of all, a secret financial account tied to an NGO Clinton had publicly defended, funded with money originally earmarked for drinking water projects. There were no more whispers. The room boiled with tension. Clinton gripped the edge of her desk. Pale, her lips moved, but no sound emerged. She had come to destroy Jonathan Roumie, and now an entire nation, and beyond, was watching her collapse. Roumie didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He simply whispered, "You have a voice, Madam Secretary, and today, you finally started using it." And with that, the storm hit full force. Just as momentum seemed unstoppable, the system struck back. News broke. Jonathan Roumie under ethical review for undisclosed investment in a defunct startup. A flurry of media reports followed. The claim that Roumie had failed to declare a small, obscure company in his financial disclosures. But within 15 minutes, the story collapsed. The truth was simple. The company had been dissolved 3 years ago, and the transaction had already been reported twice in federal compliance filing. The forum's ethics office, in a rare live statement, addressed the rumors directly. There is no active investigation against Mr. Jonathan Roumie. The accusations made today are without basis and categorically false. Suddenly, the outrage was no longer directed at Roumie. It turned against the system, the desperation, the manipulation, the political games. Even senators aligned with Clinton began slipping out of the room, faces tight with discomfort. She sat alone, shoulders heavy, lips tight, while Roumie sat calm, composed, a copy of his original testimony resting gently on the table in front of him. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In the midst of the case, his chief of staff appeared beside him. No briefing, no whisper, just a handwritten note. He slipped it into Roumie's hand and stepped back. Roumie opened it. The handwriting was familiar, slightly slanted, blue ink. It was from his mother. "I saw you on television today. I remember when they laughed at us for waiting in line for food stamps. I remember you reading by flashlight when they cut our power. I'm crying today, Jonathan. Not because you're famous, because today you didn't speak for a nation. You spoke for me." He pressed the note to his chest. Then quietly he stood. The room turned toward him. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't call for applause. He simply said, "I didn't come here to win. I came to clean out what's been rotting behind these walls for far too long." He held up a photo. A boy, maybe 7 years old, sat on a cracked porch wearing hand-me-down jeans, holding a school lunch wrapped in a plastic bag. "That boy is me," Roumie said. "And for him, I keep fighting." Silence fell. Even seasoned reporters wiped at their eyes. Clinton covered her face. And across the continent, from Los Angeles to Lima, people weren't just watching anymore. They were crying. The movement grew. News channels began airing segments with titles like, "The Night Jonathan Roumie Broke the Silence. From Poverty to Power, a Voice for the Forgotten." Social media flooded with a single call: Clinton must resign. Investigative journalists unearthed more. Old financial records, connections between Clinton's foundation and a string of suspicious offshore accounts. Even former allies avoided her in the hallways of the forum. She was collapsing from the inside out. And then something chilling happened. Senator Carmona, a longtime social democrat, known for her calm tone and fierce party loyalty, stood up. She cleared her throat. Her voice was steady. "I've served in this forum for 32 years. I've seen scandals. I've seen cover-ups. But I have never seen something unravel this quickly and with such truth." She turned to Hillary Clinton. "Madam Secretary, I believe it's time for you to step aside." Gasps filled the chamber. Clinton's expression shattered. Her eyes welled. She tried to respond, but no sound came out. The humiliation she had so carefully orchestrated now consumed her. Meanwhile, Jonathan Roumie stood silent. No gloating, no reaction. only resolve. Because he understood, true justice doesn't need vengeance. It simply needs light. And just as it seemed the storm had passed, it darkened again. Security burst into the room. Gasps became screams. A staff member had been caught attempting to breach Roumie's private office. A USB drive had been found plugged into a secure presidential laptop containing Roumie's personal and confidential casework. The motive? Still unclear. But the suspect had previously worked on a subcommittee co-chaired by Hillary Clinton. Cameras captured the chaos, and the world watched, stunned. This was no longer a political battle. It was sabotage. Roumie was swiftly escorted to a secure room by protective staff. He sat alone, not afraid, just heavy. They had gone that far. They had sunk to this. That only meant one thing: he was getting too close to the truth. He closed his eyes, he pictured the broken porch of his childhood, and he made himself a quiet promise. No matter what, I'll finish this. As a continent waited for answers, a letter arrived for Roumie. It was written in shaky, fading blue ink from Clara Morales, an 84-year-old widow from the Midwest. Her late husband, Don Roumie, a former railway worker, had died of lung disease from chemical exposure Clinton had once voted to ignore in committee. He worked that job to feed our kids. He never complained, not even when they made him clean tanks without a mask. And when I saw you speak for men like him, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. You didn't just stand up to Hillary, you stood up for Jamie. Roumie wiped his eyes, not as a politician, not even as a speaker, but as a son, a neighbor, a man who had seen injustice and finally called it by name. He worked that job to feed our children, the letter read. He never complained, not even when they made him clean chemical tanks without a mask. And when I saw you stand up for men like him, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. You didn't just stand up to Hillary Clinton, you stood up for Jamie. Roumie's eyes brimmed. In all his years in public life, few things had ever moved him like this. He looked out the tall window beside him. The sun was setting softly over the Capitol dome. This wasn't politics anymore. It was a battle for the souls of the forgotten, and he wasn't going to let them down. The forum room was at capacity. Cameras clicked and whirred. Reporters packed in shoulder to shoulder. Security agents stood at every corner, silent and watchful. Then the door opened. Jonathan Roumie entered. He didn't walk like a politician. He walked like a man who carried with him the weight of a nation that had been ignored too long. His steps were slow, measured. In his left hand, the letter from Clara Morales. Silence fell across the room like a curtain. Roumie didn't go to his desk. He walked directly to the central podium, reserved only for official declarations. The delegates straightened. Some held their breath. He looked up, requested the floor. No one objected. He unfolded the letter, his hand steady, and began to read. Each word, each line written with pain, each phrase from Clara's trembling hand landed like sacred truth. And when he finished, he paused. Then quietly, his voice full but fragile, "I don't care if this costs me everything," he said. "Because if I walk away from this place knowing I stood for those who built this country, the ones no one ever sees, then I walk away with my head held high." Some representatives lowered their eyes. Others wiped at them. Outside, America was weeping. But then something no one expected happened. Senator Romina Del Valle, a lifelong ally of Clinton and loyal to the party machine, slowly rose from her seat. Her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't ignore what we've seen," she said. "Not anymore. For years, I voted with Secretary Clinton. But today, I vote with the truth." A stunned hush swept the room. She placed a motion on the floor. "I propose a formal investigation into the alleged misuse of federal humanitarian funds connected to the office of Secretary Hillary Clinton." Shock rippled through the room. Clinton's face blanched. Her aides moved in a frenzy behind her. The president of the forum banged the gavel. Votes in favor? Hands began to rise, one by one, left and right, young and old, some trembling, until more than 2/3 of the room stood in approval. The motion passed. The investigation was official. Roumie didn't move, didn't celebrate. He only closed his eyes and whispered, "For Jamie, for Clara, for all of them." In her private chambers, Hillary Clinton watched the headlines unfold. Clinton under federal investigation. Roumie exposes broken system. The people rise up. Her phone rang nonstop. Donors, lawyers, former allies. Then her brother. "Michelle, you need to stop before you destroy what's left of yourself." For the first time in decades, Hillary Clinton cried. Not for losing power, but because she realized the truth, that Roumie's words hadn't just humiliated her, they had unmasked her. That night, in silence and shame, she drafted her resignation letter. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my duties in this forum while this matter is resolved. She pressed send, and the confrontation was over. But Jonathan Roumie's mission was just beginning. The room emptied slowly, like a battlefield after the last shot. Reporters flooded the hallways. Faces were pale. No one knew what to say. But Jonathan Roumie quietly returned to his office. No cameras, no victory speeches, just silence. His hands were trembling, not from fear, from liberation. He hadn't asked for this battle. He hadn't sought it out. But when Hillary Clinton rose to shame him on the world stage, something inside him cracked open. Not rage, not ambition, conviction. He pulled out Clara's letter again, folded it gently, placed it in a frame on his desk. He looked out the window. He didn't feel powerful. He felt responsible. This wasn't about Clinton anymore. It was about awakening a system that had slept for too long. And for the first time in years, the people felt like someone was fighting for them. His phone buzzed, a new message from the Secretary General. Proud of you, you didn't flinch, you didn't fall. You spoke for the forgotten, they trust you. Now, use it wisely. Roumie closed his eyes. He hadn't done it for applause. But from that sender, it meant something. And that night, the international communications team issued a rare statement. What Jonathan Roumie did today was not politics. It was patriotism. The system fights dirty, but courage fights harder. And today, the world saw the courage we believe in. Across the continent, social media exploded. Veterans, single mothers, farmers, nurses, people who hadn't voted in years. They all shared the speech with a single line. He spoke for me. That night, Roumie returned home. No press, no cameras, just a long, silent hug from his wife, Gabriella. She said nothing at first, just held him close, then whispered, "You made a continent cry today, Jonathan, but you made me proud." He didn't answer. His throat was tight. Gabriella reached down and handed him a stack of envelopes. They came while you were gone, all handwritten, no emails, just people pouring out their souls. Roumie opened one. It was from a child in Honduras, written in shaky, oversized letters. "Mr. Roumie, my dad says people like us don't matter, but after seeing you today, I think maybe we do." Roumie broke, not from exhaustion, but from purpose. He looked at Gabriella and whispered, "If I ever forget why I'm here, remind me of this moment." Gabriella simply nodded. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "President Roumie, my dad says people like us are worthless, but after seeing you today, I believe we're not." Jonathan Roumie broke down, not because of politics, not because of pressure, but because this fight truly mattered. He turned to Gabriella, his voice cracked. "If I ever forget why I'm here, remind me of this moment." Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She didn't speak, only nodded. At dawn, Roumie stood alone, sipping coffee by the window of the presidential residence. The grounds were peaceful, but his heart was not. A knock at the door. His escort's voice came through, strangely soft. "Mr. Roumie, you should open this one yourself." He opened it slowly, and there she stood, Doña Clara Morales, the 84-year-old widow whose letter had ignited a national awakening. She had traveled all night, alone by bus, just to see him. Her eyes filled with tears. "I just needed to see the man who spoke for Jamie," she whispered. Roumie helped her inside with trembling hands. "You didn't have to come," he said, overwhelmed. "I did," she answered, "because you gave my husband his dignity back, even in death." They sat for hours. No cameras, no press, only stories and tears. And as she rose to leave, she hugged him tightly. "Don't stop," she whispered. "Never stop." Roumie made a silent vow in his heart. No matter how hard they came at him, he would not give up. That same afternoon, Roumie quietly traveled to a small church gym in rural New Mexico. No press, no speeches, just a folding chair, surrounded by families still living with bottled water and chronic illness after a chemical disaster. He listened to each story. He said almost nothing, until from the back, a boy came forward, a folded drawing clutched in his hand. He was trembling. Roumie knelt before him. "Hello," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Eli," the boy whispered. "Is that for me?" Roumie asked. Eli nodded. It was a child's drawing. Roumie standing in front of the Capitol, surrounded by children and elders. Above him, a giant sign that read, "You spoke for us." Roumie looked down, holding back tears. "Can I keep it?" he asked softly. Eli smiled. "My mom said, you're the first adult who ever really meant it." Roumie hugged him. No words, because sometimes the loudest truths come from the smallest voices. While Roumie walked among the people, Hillary Clinton remained locked in a quiet office at the forum. She hadn't spoken since her resignation, but the pressure was mounting. Eventually, she stepped before the cameras. Her voice was hollow. "I made decisions I believed were right, but I now understand the cost, not just to my reputation, but to the people I once claimed to represent." She paused. "I don't agree with everything Jonathan Roumie believes, but now I know his heart belongs to the people." In a quiet office in New Mexico, Roumie watched her from a dusty monitor. He didn't feel victorious. He felt grief. Grief for all the years that leaders played games while the people bled quietly. But something had shifted. Not because of headlines, but because truth had finally found a voice strong enough to break the silence. A week later, what was supposed to be a routine interview took a different turn. The journalist asked him plainly, "Mr. Roumie, why do you keep going? Even with the threats, the sabotage, the attacks?" Roumie didn't blink. He reached into his jacket and pulled out two things: Eli's drawing and Clara's letter. He held them up to the camera. "Because they can't sit here," he said quietly. "They don't have lobbyists. They don't have platforms. They don't have networks, but they have me. And I remember being one of them." The journalist couldn't speak. Millions were watching. Mothers held their children tighter. Veterans sat in silence. Children looked toward the screen with new eyes. It wasn't a speech, it was a promise, and the people felt it. The next morning, Jonathan Roumie's name wasn't trending because of scandal. It was trending because of hope. "He spoke for me." That's what thousands wrote. Letters poured in, photos, crayon drawings, folded flags, old water bills, pieces of real lives. A retired miner wrote, "I've never cried for politics, but when I saw him fight for us, I did. He gave us back our voice." Schools showed his speech in civics class. Churches played it in their sermons. Even old critics called it the most human moment politics has seen in decades. But for Roumie, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a beginning. When he returned to the forum, he didn't expect applause. He entered quietly, and something happened. Senators, advisors, security guards, they stood up, one by one, not for a politician, but for a man who had done what few dared. He told the truth and let it echo for the voiceless. Roumie nodded humbly and returned to his seat, the very same seat where Hillary Clinton once tried to destroy him with a single accusation. But it was his single phrase that changed a nation. "Where were you, Madam Secretary, when the mothers buried their children? While you toasted at the galas in Davos?" That one sentence broke the silence of the forgotten. Dear viewer, if this story moved your heart, give it a like to honor every voice that's been ignored.